Paris, France, June 1943. A young woman sits in a cramped attic, hunched over a wooden table. Her fingers dance across the keys of a radio transmitter, tapping out coded messages in Morse code. Tap, 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 dash, dot, dash. The sound is soft, almost musical, but every second she transmits, the Gestapo's radio detection vans are getting closer. They're hunting her. They've been hunting her for weeks. She knows they'll find her eventually. Everyone knows. The average life expectancy for a radio operator in occupied France is 6 weeks. She's been here for 4 months. Her name is Noor Inayat Khan, and she refuses to carry a gun. Not because she's afraid, because she believes in nonviolence. She's a pacifist, raised to believe that all life is sacred, that violence corrupts the soul, that there's always another way. And yet, here she is, in the most dangerous job in the entire French resistance, the most hunted person in Paris. The messages she's tapping out right now, they're coordinating. Escape routes for Jewish families, warning resistance fighters about German raids, directing sabotage operations that'll save hundreds of lives. All while the Gestapo closes in, mile by mile, street by street. A woman who won't kill, working for an organization that does nothing but. Because sometimes the only way to stop evil is to face it, even if it means facing death. This is her story. Now I know what you're thinking. A pacifist in the middle of World War II? That doesn't make sense. How does someone who refuses to fight end up in one of the most dangerous operations in the entire war? Stick with me, because this story gets a whole lot stranger and a whole lot more inspiring. See, Noor wasn't just any woman. She was a princess, Indian royalty, raised in luxury in Paris, studied music at the Sorbonne, wrote children's books, played the harp. She grew up in a world of art and poetry and spirituality. Her father was one of the most famous Sufi mystics in the world. He taught her that the purpose of life is to serve others, to spread love, to never cause harm. And she believed him, with everything she had. So when war broke out, when the Nazis invaded France, when bombs started falling and people started dying, Noor had a choice. Run, hide, save herself, or fight. But fighting meant violence, and violence meant betraying everything she'd been raised to believe. So she found another way. She became a radio operator. No gun, no knife, just a radio, a code, and courage most men don't have. Noor Inayat Khan was born on New Year's Day, 1914, in Moscow, Russia. Yeah, you heard that right. An Indian princess born in Russia. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was a Sufi teacher who'd left India to spread his teachings across the world. Her mother, Ora Ray Baker, was an American from New Mexico who'd become one of his students, then his wife. From the moment she was born, Noor's life was anything but ordinary. Her father named her Noor-Nisa, which means light of womanhood. And light is exactly what she brought into every room she entered. But her childhood wasn't easy. Her family moved constantly, Moscow to London, London to Paris, never enough money, always struggling. Her father taught Sufism, which meant he didn't charge for his lessons. The family survived on donations, on the kindness of followers, on faith that somehow they'd make it through. And they did. Barely. Noor grew up watching her father give everything he had to help others. He'd give away his last dollar to someone who needed it more. He'd stay up all night counseling a stranger in crisis. He believed that service to humanity was service to God, and he taught his children the same. Be kind, be generous, be truthful, never harm another living being. Noor absorbed these lessons like a sponge. She was quiet, gentle, thoughtful. She loved music. She loved stories. She loved beauty. Her siblings remembered her as the peacemaker, the one who'd step between fighting brothers, who'd calm crying babies, who'd nurse injured birds back to health. In 1927, when Noor was 13, tragedy struck. Her father died suddenly. He'd been traveling, teaching, spreading his message of love and unity. And then, just like that, he was gone. Heart failure. He was only 44 years old. Noor was devastated. Her whole world had been built around this man, this gentle, wise, loving teacher who'd shown her how to live. And now he was gone. The family was broke. Noor's mother fell into a depression so deep she could barely function. Noor, at 13 years old, became the head of the household. She took care of her younger siblings. She managed the family's finances. She held everything together when it was all falling apart. And she never complained, not once. Her brother remembered her saying, "This is what Father would have wanted, for us to be strong, for us to help each other, for us to keep serving, so that's what she did." The family settled in Paris. Noor studied music at the Sorbonne, took courses in child psychology, learned to play the harp, the piano, the vina. She started writing children's stories, fairy tales, inspired by her Indian heritage and her Sufi beliefs. Stories about kindness conquering cruelty, about love defeating hate, about light overcoming darkness. She believed in these stories. They weren't just tales, they were how she saw the world. By the late 1930s, Noor had become a published author. Her stories were broadcast on French radio. She performed her music at concerts. She was building a life, a good life, a peaceful life. And then the Nazis invaded Poland. September 1939. World War II had begun. At first, Noor thought maybe she could stay out of it. She was a pacifist. Violence wasn't her path. But as the months went by, as the news got worse, as Nazi Germany steamrolled across Europe, she realized something. Sometimes refusing to fight isn't noble. It's cowardice. Not fighting means letting evil win. And Noor couldn't stomach that. May 1940, the Nazis invaded France. The French army collapsed in 6 weeks. The government surrendered. Nazi flags flew over Paris. Swastikas hung from the Eiffel Tower. German soldiers marched through the streets. The city Noor loved, the city she'd grown up in, was now under enemy control. She and her family fled south, trying to escape the occupation. They made it to Bordeaux, then across the border into England. Refugees, exiles, everything they'd built in France, gone. Noor was 26 years old. She'd lost her home, her life, her dreams, and she was done running. In England, she made a decision. I'm going to fight back. But how? She couldn't kill. Her beliefs wouldn't allow it. She couldn't even imagine holding a gun, pointing it at another human being, pulling the trigger. That wasn't who she was. But there were other ways to fight. She joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAF, in November 1940. They trained her as a wireless operator. She learned Morse code, learned how to transmit and receive messages, learned the technical side of radio communications. She was good at it, really good. Her musical training helped. Morse code is rhythm, timing, pattern. It came naturally to her. She spent months working in England, sending and receiving messages for the RAF. Important work, safe work. But Noor wanted more. In early 1943, a man approached her. His name was Selwyn Jepson. He worked for the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, a secret British organization created by Winston Churchill to, as he put it, set Europe ablaze. The SOE's job was sabotage, espionage, assassination. They operated behind enemy lines, supporting resistance movements, blowing up bridges, derailing trains, killing Nazis. And they needed radio operators. People who could go into occupied France, set up clandestine radio networks, transmit intelligence back to London. People who could work alone under constant threat of discovery and death. People who wouldn't break under torture. Jepson had been watching Noor. He saw her skills as a radio operator. He saw her language abilities. She spoke perfect French and English, could pass as either nationality. But more than that, he saw something in her character. A quiet strength, a determination, a willingness to sacrifice. He asked her a question. Would you be willing to go into occupied France as a radio operator? Noor understood what he was asking. Radio operators in France had the shortest life expectancy of any SOE agent, 6 weeks on average. The Gestapo hunted them relentlessly. They had radio detection vans that could triangulate a transmission in minutes. Once they found you, you were done, captured, tortured, executed. And Noor would be the first female radio operator the SOE sent into France. No one knew if a woman could survive in that role. The odds were stacked against her in every possible way. Jepson expected her to say no. Any sane person would. But Noor didn't hesitate. She said, yes, I'll go. Her family was horrified. Her mother begged her not to go. Her siblings tried to talk her out of it. You're a musician, a writer, a gentle soul. This isn't for you. You'll die. Noor knew they were probably right, but she also knew something they didn't. Fear is a choice, and she was choosing courage. The SOE put her through training, months of it, grueling, exhausting, brutal. They taught her how to shoot. She learned, but she told her instructors she'd never use a gun. They taught her hand-to-hand combat. She struggled. Violence didn't come naturally to her. They taught her how to lie, how to create a cover story, how to live a double life. She was terrible at it. Honesty was too ingrained in her. They taught her how to withstand interrogation, how to resist torture, how to keep secrets even when your body is screaming. Her training reports were mixed. Some instructors said she was too gentle, too honest, too clumsy, not suited for undercover work. One report said she was unstable and temperamental. Another said she was not overburdened with brains. But Selwyn Jepson disagreed. He saw past the surface. He saw a woman with an iron will, a woman who'd survived the death of her father, who'd held her family together through poverty and exile, who'd said yes when everyone else said no. He believed in her. And Churchill needed radio operators, desperately. So despite the doubts, despite the warnings, despite every red flag, Noor Inayat Khan was approved for deployment. They gave her the codename Madeline. They gave her a cover story. She was Jean-Marie Renier, a children's nurse. They gave her a radio, codes, a pistol she refused to carry, and a cyanide pill in case she was captured. June 1943. Noor flew to France in a tiny Lysander aircraft. It was a moonless night. The plane landed in a field outside Le Mans. She jumped out, grabbed her suitcase containing the radio, and watched the plane take off again, disappearing into the darkness. She was alone, in occupied France, 29 years old, a pacifist in the middle of a war, and her mission had just begun. Noor's assignment was to work with the Prosper Network, the largest resistance circuit in Paris. Her job was simple, in theory. Receive messages from London, decode them, pass them to the resistance. Receive intelligence from the resistance, encode it, transmit it back to London. Be the link, the lifeline, the invisible thread connecting occupied France to the free world. But nothing about it was simple. Every time she transmitted, she risked detection. The Gestapo had direction-finding equipment mounted in vans. They'd drive through Paris, listening for illegal transmissions. When they picked up a signal, they'd triangulate it, close in, knock down the door, game over. So radio operators had to be smart. Never transmit from the same location twice. Never transmit for more than 20 minutes. Keep moving, keep changing, stay ahead of the hunters. Noor followed the rules at first. She moved constantly, transmitting from different apartments, different neighborhoods, always on the move. She was careful, meticulous, professional, and for the first few weeks, everything went smoothly. She sent messages to London, she received instructions, she coordinated resistance operations, sabotage missions, arms drops, agent movements. She was good at her job, really good. London was impressed with the quality and frequency of her transmissions. But then disaster struck. June 1943. The Prosper network was betrayed. Someone talked, maybe under torture, maybe for money. Nobody knows for sure. But the result was catastrophic. The Gestapo arrested over 100 resistance members in a single week. Leaders, fighters, couriers, safe house operators. The entire network collapsed. Dozens of SOE agents were captured. Some were executed immediately. Others were sent to concentration camps. Within days, Noor was the only radio operator left in Paris. The only one. London sent her an urgent message. "Get out! Come home! You're the last one standing. It's too dangerous." But Noor refused. "If I leave, there's no one. No communication, no coordination. The resistance in Paris will be blind and deaf." She made a decision that would define her legacy. "I'm staying." London tried again. "You won't last. They'll find you." Noor's response was simple. "Then I'll make it count while I can." Think about that for a second. She knew she was going to die. She knew it. The odds of survival were 0. Every radio operator before her had been caught or killed. She was alone, hunted, operating in a city crawling with Gestapo. And she chose to stay anyway. Why? Because people were depending on her. Because the mission mattered more than her life. Because running away meant letting the Nazis win. That's the kind of courage we're talking about here. Not the Hollywood version, not the guy who charges into battle with guns blazing. The quiet kind, the kind that says, "I know this will probably kill me, but I'm doing it anyway because it's right." That's real bravery. And fellas, that's the kind of stuff they don't teach anymore. That sense of duty, that willingness to sacrifice, that belief that some things are bigger than your own survival. We've lost that, haven't we? But back then, people like Noor had it, and it's worth remembering. Now, you might be wondering, why am I telling you all this? Why does this matter? Well, because stories like Noor's remind us what real character looks like, real honor, real sacrifice. In a world where people complain about everything, where everyone wants to be a victim, where nobody wants to take responsibility for anything, Noor stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. She didn't whine, she didn't make excuses, she just did what needed to be done. And if you're still watching, if this story is grabbing you the way it grabbed me when I first learned about it, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to keep bringing you these stories. Stories about people who did extraordinary things when it mattered most. Stories that deserve to be told. Stories that might just inspire us to be a little braver, a little better, a little more like the men and women who saved the world when everything was on the line. All right, let's keep going. For the next 4 months, Noor worked alone. She was the sole radio link between the French resistance and London. Every night she'd set up her radio in a different location. She'd tap out messages, transmitting intelligence, coordinating operations, keeping the connection alive. And every night, the Gestapo hunted her. They knew she was out there. They could hear her transmissions. They just couldn't find her. She was too fast, too careful, too smart. But the strain was enormous. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't relax. She couldn't trust anyone. She moved constantly. never staying in one place for more than a night or two. She carried her radio in a suitcase, heavy, awkward, conspicuous. If she was stopped and searched, she was dead. She had close calls, so many close calls. One night she was transmitting from an apartment when she heard German voices outside, boots on the stairs, shouting. They were coming. She grabbed her radio, shoved it in the suitcase, and climbed out the window onto the roof. She hid behind a chimney, clutching her suitcase, barely breathing, while Gestapo officers searched the apartment below. They found nothing. She waited until they left, then climbed back inside and finished transmitting her message. Another time, she was walking through Paris with her radio when a Gestapo officer stopped her. "What's in the suitcase?" She smiled, friendly, innocent. "Just my belongings. I'm moving to a new apartment." The officer looked her up and down. He was suspicious. He reached for the suitcase. Noor's heart was pounding. If he opened it, she was done. But she didn't panic. She kept smiling. She started chatting with him, asking about his day, complimenting his uniform, distracting him. After a few moments, he waved her on. "Move along." She walked away, calm, composed. Then, as soon as she was out of sight, she ducked into an alley and vomited from fear. But she didn't quit. She kept going. Noor developed techniques to avoid detection. She learned the Gestapo's patterns when they searched, where they searched. She learned which neighborhoods were safer, which streets to avoid. She memorized the locations of their checkpoints, their detection vans, their headquarters. She became a ghost, moving through the city unseen. But she couldn't stay invisible forever. October 1943. Noor had been in France for 4 months. 4 months of constant danger, 4 months of sleepless nights and narrow escapes. She was exhausted, worn down, running on fumes, and then she made a mistake. She'd been staying at an apartment owned by a woman named Renee Gary. Renee was a friend of the resistance, had sheltered agents before. Noor trusted her, but Renee's neighbors were suspicious. Why was this young woman coming and going at odd hours? What was in that suitcase she always carried? They started watching. One of them, a woman named Renee Leconte, decided to inform the Gestapo. She called them, told them she suspected someone in her building was working with the resistance. The Gestapo investigated. They watched the building. They saw Noor coming and going. They ran her description through their files. And they found a match. Madeline, the radio operator they'd been hunting for months. October 13th, 1943. The Gestapo moved in. Noor was in the apartment working on her codes. She heard the knock on the door. Loud, aggressive, German voices. She knew what it meant. They'd found her. She grabbed her radio, tried to destroy the codes, but there wasn't time. The door burst open. German officers poured in, guns drawn. Noor was arrested. They'd finally caught her. The woman who'd evaded them for 4 months. The ghost of Paris. She was done. But even in capture, Noor didn't break. They took her to Gestapo headquarters at 84 Avenue Foch, the most feared building in Paris. The place where resistance fighters were interrogated, tortured, broken. They wanted names. Who do you work for? Who are your contacts? Where are the other agents? Noor said nothing. They threatened her. Still nothing. They brought in interrogators, experts in breaking people. Noor stayed silent. One of the Gestapo officers later said she was the most difficult prisoner he'd ever encountered. Unbreakable. They found her notebooks. She'd been keeping detailed records of all her transmissions, all her codes, all her contacts. A massive security breach. If the Gestapo decoded those notebooks, the entire resistance network would be exposed. Hundreds of people would die. Noor knew this. She had to escape, not to save herself, to destroy those notebooks before the Gestapo could use them. So she started planning. Most prisoners at Avenue Foch were terrified, broken, compliant. But Noor wasn't most prisoners. She studied the building, the guards, the routines. She looked for weaknesses, and she found one. The bathroom window. It was small, high up, barred, but the bars were old, rusty, maybe loose. She waited for her chance. One evening she asked to use the bathroom. The guard let her go, alone. She climbed onto the toilet, reached the window, and started working on the bars. Pulling, twisting, slowly, quietly, they started to give. She pulled harder. One bar came loose, then another. She squeezed through the gap, onto the roof. She was outside, free. She climbed down the side of the building, dropped to the ground, and ran. She was in the heart of Nazi-occupied Paris, in her prison clothes, with no money, no papers, no contacts. But she was out. She ran through the streets, trying to get as far from Avenue Foch as possible before they noticed she was gone. But she didn't know Paris as well as she thought. She got lost, turned around. And when she tried to climb over a wall to hide, she was spotted by a German patrol. They grabbed her, dragged her back to Avenue Foch. She'd been free for less than 2 hours. The Gestapo was furious, humiliated. She'd embarrassed them, made them look incompetent, so they punished her. They chained her in her cell, hands and feet. She couldn't move, couldn't even lie down comfortably. They kept her like that for weeks, but still she didn't talk. She didn't give up a single name. Not one. Think about that. After months of being hunted, after being captured, tortured, chained like an animal, she still protected the people who'd worked with her. She could have bought herself better treatment, maybe even freedom. All she had to do was talk. But she didn't, because that's not who she was. That's not what her father had taught her. Be truthful, be loyal, protect others, even at your own expense. She stayed true to those values right to the end. The Gestapo realized they weren't going to break her, so they made a decision. She was too dangerous to keep in France. They'd send her to Germany, to a concentration camp. On November 27, 1943, Noor was transferred to Pforzheim prison in Germany. She was classified as Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. It was a special designation for the most dangerous political prisoners. It meant she would disappear. No trial, no record, just gone. She was put in solitary confinement, a tiny cell, no windows, no human contact, shackled hand and foot. She spent 10 months in that cell, alone, in darkness. Most people would have lost their minds, but Noor didn't. She held on. She stayed strong. The guards later testified that she never complained, never begged, never cried. She remained calm, dignified, human. Even when treated like an animal, she refused to become one. That's strength, fellas. Real strength, not physical. Spiritual, the kind of strength that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. September 1944. The Allies were advancing. Paris had been liberated in August. Germany was losing the war. Everyone knew it. But the Nazis weren't done killing. They decided to execute the most dangerous prisoners before the Allies could free them. Noor Inayat Khan was at the top of that list. September 11, 1944. Noor was taken from her cell at Pforzheim. She and 3 other female SOE agents, Yolande Beekman, Elaine Pluman, and Madeleine Damerment, were transported to Dachau concentration camp in Bavaria. They arrived late at night. They were taken to a secluded area, away from the other prisoners. An SS officer named Friedrich Wilhelm Ruppert was waiting for them. He'd been ordered to execute them, one by one. He took the first woman, shot her in the back of the head, then the second, then the third. Noor was last. She knew what was coming. She'd heard the gunshots. She knew she had seconds to live. The witnesses said she was calm. No tears, no begging. She knelt down, and just before Ruppert pulled the trigger, she said one word, liberté, freedom. Then she was gone. Noor Inayat Khan died at Dachau on September 13, 1944. She was 30 years old, a pacifist who never fired a gun, a musician who became a spy, a gentle soul who faced the worst evil humanity has ever produced and refused to break. She was cremated. Her ashes were scattered. There's no grave, no body, just memory. For years, nobody knew what happened to her. Her family waited, hoped, prayed she'd come home. But after the war, the truth came out. She'd been executed, murdered by the Nazis just months before the end of the war. The British government posthumously awarded her the George Cross, the highest civilian award for bravery. The French gave her the Croix de Guerre. In 2012, a statue of Noor was unveiled in London in Gordon Square, near where she'd trained. It shows her in her WAF uniform, looking calm, determined, strong. She was the first Asian woman to be honored with a memorial in Britain. The inscription reads, Noor Inayat Khan, George Cross, member of the British Empire, a British heroine of World War II. But for a long time, her story was classified, secret. The British government didn't want people knowing the details. Too embarrassing. They'd sent a woman into occupied France, knowing she'd probably die. And she did. But eventually the files were declassified, books were written, documentaries made, and people started learning about this incredible woman who refused to carry a gun but carried something far more powerful: courage, integrity, faith. She saved lives without taking them. She fought evil without becoming evil. She showed that strength doesn't always come from violence. Sometimes it comes from refusing violence, from holding on to your values even when the world is trying to rip them away from you. Now, let me ask you something. When's the last time you heard a story like this in the news? When's the last time you saw someone in the public eye demonstrate this kind of character, this kind of selflessness, this kind of courage? You don't, do you? Because we live in a different world now, a softer world, a world where people think courage is posting something controversial on social media, where sacrifice means giving up your favorite coffee for a week, where honor is just a word in old movies. But Noor's story reminds us what those words really mean, what they cost, and why they matter. And if this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me, if you're feeling something stirring inside you, some memory of what it means to stand for something bigger than yourself, then I want you to do something for me. Hit that like button. Let me know this resonates with you, because I need to know there are still people out there who care about these stories, who understand why they're important, who want to remember the men and women who gave everything so we could have the freedom we enjoy today. All right, let's keep going, because there's more to this story. See, Noor didn't just refuse to break under torture. She actively resisted, even in chains, even in solitary confinement. The guards at Pforzheim prison later testified about her behavior. She'd scratch messages on her cell walls, messages of hope, of defiance. She'd hum songs just loud enough for other prisoners to hear, reminding them they weren't alone. She'd tap on the walls in Morse code, communicating with whoever might be listening. She refused to be silenced. One of the guards, a man named Wilhelm Krauss, remembered her clearly. He said she was unlike any prisoner he'd ever seen. Most were broken within days, sobbing, begging, losing their minds. But not this woman. She remained calm, dignified, strong. He said it unnerved him, made him uncomfortable. How could someone in chains, in darkness, in complete isolation, remain so composed? It didn't make sense. But that's because Krauss didn't understand something fundamental about Noor. Her strength didn't come from her circumstances. It came from her beliefs, from her faith. Her father had taught her that suffering is temporary, that the soul is eternal, that no one can take away your inner light unless you let them. And Noor never let them. The Nazis could chain her body. They couldn't chain her spirit. There's another detail about Noor's capture that's worth mentioning. When the Gestapo arrested her, they found something unusual in her possession. A children's book, one of the fairy tales she'd written before the war. It was a story about a princess who overcame great darkness with kindness and courage. The Gestapo officers mocked her. What kind of spy carries a children's book? But Noor wasn't embarrassed. That book represented everything she believed in. That goodness can triumph over evil. That light can overcome darkness. That love is stronger than hate. She carried it as a reminder of who she was, of what she was fighting for. And she never forgot. Another thing that sets Noor apart from most resistance fighters is this. She had multiple chances to escape, and she refused them all. Before she was captured, London sent her extraction orders several times. "Come home. You've done enough. We'll send a plane. We'll get you out." Each time she said no. The work isn't finished. I'm needed here. After her first escape attempt from Avenue Foch failed, there were other opportunities. Other agents offered to help her. Resistance members who knew the city, who had safe houses, who could have gotten her to the border. She refused. "I won't put them at risk. If I'm caught again, anyone who helped me will be tortured for information. I won't do that to them." Do you see what I'm saying? She wasn't just brave. She was selfless. She put other people's safety above her own. She'd rather die than let someone else suffer because of her. That's the kind of person she was. And that's the kind of person we should all aspire to be. Let's talk about the circumstances of her death for a moment, because it's important. Noor and the 3 other women executed with her at Dachau, Yolande Beekman, Elaine Pluman, and Madeleine Damament, were all SOE agents, all radio operators or couriers, all women who'd volunteered for the most dangerous missions of the war. And all of them had been tortured. All of them had refused to talk. When Friedrich Wilhelm Ruppert, the SS officer who executed them, was questioned after the war, he described what happened that night. He said the women knew they were going to die. They'd been brought to a secluded area of the camp. It was late, dark, cold. They were made to kneel. One by one they were shot. Ruppert said none of them cried. None of them begged for mercy. They faced death with dignity, courage, strength. Noor was the last to die. She watched her 3 companions executed before her. She knew what was coming. And in her final moment, she didn't curse her killers. She didn't scream. She said one word, liberté, freedom. Think about that. After everything she'd been through, after all the suffering, the torture, the isolation, her last thought wasn't about herself. It was about the cause, about freedom, about the reason she'd volunteered in the first place. That's who Noor Inayat Khan was. A woman who stayed true to her purpose right to the very end. After the war, the British government conducted investigations into what happened to their SOE agents. They tracked down witnesses, interrogated Nazi officers, pieced together the stories of the men and women who died in service. When they learned what happened to Noor, they were stunned, not just by her courage, but by her impact. See, during those 4 months she operated alone in Paris, Noor transmitted more intelligence than any other radio operator. She coordinated dozens of resistance operations, sabotage missions, arms drops, agent extractions. She kept the connection between London and the French resistance alive when everyone else had been captured or killed. Without her, the resistance in Paris would have been blind and deaf during one of the most critical periods of the war. Her work saved lives, dozens of lives, maybe hundreds, and she did it all while being hunted every single day. The historian who wrote the definitive book on Noor's life, Shrabani Basu, discovered something remarkable during her research. Noor's transmissions weren't just frequent and accurate. They were also beautifully composed, clear, precise, professional. Some of the best radio work the SOE had ever seen. Her musical training had given her an incredible sense of rhythm and timing. Her Morse code was like a signature, instantly recognizable to the operators in London. They called it the Madeleine touch, and they knew, when they heard it, that they were receiving gold standard intelligence. But here's what really gets me about Noor's story. It's not just what she did. It's why she did it. Most SOE agents were motivated by hatred of the Nazis, by a desire for revenge, by patriotism or anger or fear. All valid reasons to fight. But Noor? She fought because she believed in something bigger. She believed that every human being has a right to freedom, to dignity, to live without fear. And she believed that sometimes you have to stand up for those rights, even when it costs you everything. Her father had taught her that all life is sacred, that violence corrupts the soul, that the purpose of existence is to serve others and spread love. And she never abandoned those beliefs. Never. Even when the easiest thing in the world would have been to say, forget the philosophy, I'm going to survive. She found a way to fight that aligned with her values. She wouldn't carry a gun because she wouldn't kill, but she'd carry a radio. She'd transmit messages. She'd coordinate operations. She'd risk her life to help others. That was her way of fighting, and it was just as brave, just as important as anyone who picked up a weapon. Maybe more so because it would have been easier to just shoot someone than to sit in an attic night after night, knowing the Gestapo was hunting you, knowing they were getting closer, and still tap out those messages, still do the work, still serve the cause. You know what really strikes me about Noor? She lived in a time when the world was darker than we can possibly imagine today. Nazi Germany had conquered most of Europe. Millions of people were being murdered in concentration camps. The Nazis seemed unstoppable. Evil seemed to be winning. And in the middle of all that darkness, Noor chose to be a light, not with grand gestures, not with speeches or manifestos, just with quiet, steady, persistent service. She did her job. She kept her values. She helped people. And when the end came, she faced it with grace. That's heroism, fellas. Real heroism. Not the comic book version. The everyday kind. The kind that says, I'm scared, I'm tired, I might not survive this, but I'm going to do the right thing anyway because that's what matters. And I'll tell you something else. We need more of that today. We live in a world where everyone wants to be a victim, where everyone has an excuse for why they can't do the hard thing, where people give up at the first sign of difficulty. But Noor shows us a different way. She shows us that character isn't about what you say. It's about what you do when things are hard, when the stakes are high, when no one's watching. That's when you find out who you really are. Now, if you're still with me, if this story is inspiring you the way it inspired me, I need to ask you something. Are you subscribed to this channel? Because here's the thing. I'm bringing you these stories that deserve to be told, stories that remind us what real courage and honor and sacrifice look like. But I can only keep doing it if people are watching, if people care. So, if you care about these stories, if you want to hear more about the men and women who did extraordinary things in World War II, Hit that subscribe button right now. It takes 2 seconds. And it tells me that these stories matter to you, that remembering these heroes matters to you, because if we don't remember them, who will? All right, let's keep going. After Noor's death, her family waited for news. Her mother, still struggling with depression, clung to hope that Noor would come home. Her brother, Vilayat, who'd also joined the war effort, searched for her. He contacted the War Office. He wrote letters. He demanded information. For months, they told him nothing. She's missing. That's all we can say. It wasn't until 1945, after the war ended, that the truth came out. Vilayat learned that his sister had been executed at Dachau. He was devastated, but he was also determined. Determined that her sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. Determined that her story would be told. Determined that justice would be served. He tracked down the men responsible for her death. Friedrich Wilhelm Ruppert, the SS officer who shot her. Wilhelm Krauss, the guard who kept her in chains. Hans Kiefer, the Gestapo officer who interrogated her. After the war, these men were tried for war crimes. Some were executed, others were imprisoned. Ruppert, the man who pulled the trigger, was sentenced to death and hanged in 1946. Kiefer got a life sentence but was released after a few years. Because that's how justice worked back then, and it still makes my blood boil. But Vilayat didn't stop there. He spent the rest of his life honoring his sister's memory. He gave speeches. He wrote articles. He made sure people knew what she'd done, what she'd sacrificed, why it mattered. And slowly the world started to listen. In 1949, Noor was posthumously awarded the George Cross, the highest civilian award for gallantry in Britain. The citation reads, Assistant Section Officer Noor Inayat Khan displayed the most conspicuous courage, both moral and physical, over a period of more than 12 months. The French awarded her the Croix de Guerre with Gold Star. Her name was added to the SOE Memorial at Valençay in France, alongside the other agents who died in service. But for decades, her story remained relatively unknown. The SOE files were classified. The British government didn't want the details getting out. It wasn't until the 1990s, when the files were finally declassified, that historians could tell the full story. And when they did, people were amazed. Here was a woman who'd done everything the male agents did, and more, who'd faced the same dangers, the same torture, the same death, and who'd done it all while refusing to abandon her principles. She became a symbol, not just of courage, but of integrity, of staying true to yourself, even when the whole world is trying to break you. In 2012, as I mentioned earlier, a bronze statue of Noor was unveiled in Gordon Square Gardens in London. It shows her in her Women's Auxiliary Air Force uniform, calm and determined. Princess Anne attended the unveiling. Hundreds of people showed up to honor her memory. Noor's story had finally been recognized, finally been celebrated, finally been given the attention it deserved. But here's what's interesting. The statue isn't in a position of violence. She's not holding a gun. She's not in combat. She's standing peacefully, dignified, strong, because that's who she was. A woman who fought without violence, who resisted without hatred, who stayed human in the face of inhumanity. The inscription on the memorial reads, Noor Inayat Khan. She fought for freedom with courage and compassion. And that says it all, doesn't it? Courage and compassion. Two things that don't often go together, but in Noor they did. She was tough enough to face the Gestapo and gentle enough to write fairy tales for children. She was brave enough to stay in occupied France when everyone else ran and kind. Enough to refuse violence even when violence surrounded her. She was everything we should aspire to be. Strong but not cruel, determined but not heartless, courageous but not reckless. She was, in every sense of the word, a hero. Let me tell you about one more thing that really gets me about Noor's story. It's the contrast between her and the men who killed her. Friedrich Wilhelm Ruppert, the SS officer who executed Noor and the 3 other women, was asked after the war why he did it, why he shot 4 unarmed women in cold blood. You know what he said? "I was following orders. That's it. No remorse, no guilt, no sense of moral responsibility. Just, I was told to do it, so I did it." That's the Nazi mindset. Obedience without conscience. Following orders without questioning whether those orders are right or wrong. It's the ultimate abdication of personal responsibility, and it's what allowed the Holocaust to happen. Millions of people just following orders. Now compare that to Noor. She had orders, too. Orders to carry a gun, orders to lie, orders to kill if necessary. But she questioned those orders. She thought about what was right and wrong, and she made her own decisions based on her values. She'd carry the radio, but not the gun. She'd risk her life, but not her integrity. She'd fight, but on her terms. That's moral courage. That's what separates humans from machines, the ability to think, to question, to choose. Ruppert chose to surrender his conscience. Noor chose to keep hers. And in the end, that's the difference between a hero and a monster. Not strength, not skill, not even bravery. It's whether you hold on to your humanity or let it go. And that's a lesson we need today more than ever. Because we live in a world where people are constantly being told to just follow the crowd, just go along, just do what everyone else is doing. Don't question, don't think, don't stand out. But that's how evil wins. Not with grand conspiracies, not with dramatic battles, just with millions of people deciding that it's easier to go along than to stand up. Noor shows us another way. She shows us that one person standing alone can make a difference. That courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. That integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about being true to yourself, even when it costs you everything. Those are old-fashioned values, I know. Duty, honor, sacrifice. The kind of things people used to teach their kids. The kind of things that built the greatest generation. The kind of things that won World War II. And the kind of things we've forgotten. But maybe, just maybe, stories like Noor's can remind us, can inspire us, can show us what we're capable of when we decide to be more than just comfortable, more than just safe, more than just survivors, when we decide to be heroes. Noor's story also highlights something we don't talk about enough, the role of women in World War II. See, when we think of WWII, we think of soldiers, men in uniforms, storming beaches, flying planes, fighting tanks. And yeah, men did most of the fighting, but women did a hell of a lot too. They worked in factories, building planes and tanks and ammunition. They served as nurses, saving lives in field hospitals under fire. They worked as code breakers, like the women at Bletchley Park who cracked the Enigma code. They served as pilots, ferrying aircraft from factories to airfields, and some, like Noor, served as spies, as saboteurs, as resistance fighters. They did everything the men did, often with less training, less support, and less recognition. And they did it while fighting against a society that told them they weren't capable, that they were too weak, too emotional, too fragile. Noor proved all of that wrong. She wasn't weak. She was stronger than most of the men who interrogated her. She wasn't emotional. She was calm under pressure that would have broken trained soldiers. She wasn't fragile. She survived 10 months of solitary confinement in chains. She was tough as nails, but she was also compassionate, kind, gentle. She didn't have to choose between strength and kindness. She was both, and that's something men need to understand. Strength doesn't mean being cruel. Toughness doesn't mean being heartless. You can be strong and kind, brave and compassionate, a warrior and a peacemaker. Noor was proof of that. Here's another thing I find fascinating about Noor. She wrote children's stories, beautiful, imaginative fairy tales inspired by her Indian heritage and her Sufi beliefs. Stories about princes and princesses, magical creatures, moral lessons. And some people might think, what does that have to do with being a spy? What does a children's book author know about espionage and danger and war? But here's the thing. Writing stories requires imagination. It requires the ability to see the world differently, to think creatively, to solve problems in unconventional ways. And that's exactly what made Noor a good spy. She didn't think like a soldier. She didn't follow the manual. She improvised. She adapted. She found solutions that others wouldn't have thought of. When she escaped from Avenue Foch, she didn't have a plan. She just saw an opportunity and took it. When she was transmitting, she didn't stick to predictable patterns. She changed locations, changed times, changed frequencies. She stayed unpredictable. And that kept her alive longer than anyone expected. Her creativity, her imagination, her ability to think outside the box, those were her greatest weapons, not guns, not training, imagination. And that came from the same place as her fairy tales, from a mind that saw possibilities instead of limitations. There's also something to be said about Noor's cultural background. She was Indian. Her father was a Sufi mystic. Her mother was American. She grew up in Russia and France. She spoke multiple languages. She understood multiple cultures, and that made her perfect for undercover work. She could blend in anywhere. She could adapt to any situation. She could connect with people from different backgrounds. In a war that was fundamentally about hatred of the other, about racism and nationalism and ethnic purity, Noor was the opposite. She was a bridge between cultures, a symbol of unity, a reminder that humanity is bigger than borders and bloodlines. The Nazis believed in racial superiority. They believed some people were better than others based on their ethnicity. Noor proved them wrong. Here was a woman of Indian descent, raised in a multicultural family, who outsmarted the Gestapo for 4 months, who refused to break under torture, who died with dignity while her captors descended into barbarism. She was everything the Nazis said was weak and inferior, and she was stronger than all of them. That's poetic justice, if you ask me. You know what's sad? Most people have never heard of Noor Inayat Khan. Ask the average person on the street to name a WWII hero, and they'll say Eisenhower, Patton, Churchill, maybe Audie Murphy. All great men, don't get me wrong. But Noor? Blank stares. And that's a shame, because her story is just as important, just as inspiring, just as worth remembering. Maybe more so because it's not the typical war story. It's not about killing the enemy. It's about serving the cause, about sacrifice, about staying true to your values even when it would be easier to abandon them. And that's the kind of story we need right now. We need reminders that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a woman sitting in an attic, tapping out Morse code, knowing she's probably going to die, but doing it anyway because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's saying no to violence, even when violence is everywhere around you. Sometimes it's choosing integrity over survival. Those are the kinds of heroes we need to celebrate. And if you agree, if you think Noor's story deserves to be heard, do me a favor. Share this video. Tell someone about it. Leave a comment. Let me know this matters to you, because these stories, these forgotten heroes, they're slipping away. And if we don't tell them, if we don't remember them, they'll be gone forever, and that would be a tragedy. let's talk about what happened to the people who knew Noor. After her death, her colleagues in the SOE were devastated. Selwyn Jepson, the man who recruited her, never forgave himself. He'd sent her into France knowing the risks, knowing she probably wouldn't come back. And he was right. For the rest of his life, he carried the guilt. He'd believed in her when others doubted. He'd pushed for her deployment when others said she wasn't ready, and she'd proven him right. She'd been extraordinary. But she'd also died, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd sent her to her death. Vera Atkins, another SOE officer who worked with the female agents, spent years after the war tracking down what happened to the women who didn't come home. She interrogated Nazi officers. She visited concentration camps. She pieced together the final days of dozens of agents. And when she learned what happened to Noor, she wept. This woman, who'd sent countless agents into danger, who'd maintained a professional distance, who'd stayed strong through the entire war, broke down when she learned how Noor died. She said later that Noor was one of the bravest people she'd ever known, and coming from Vera Atkins, that meant something, because she'd known a lot of brave people. Noor's family also struggled with her death. Her mother, Amina, never really recovered. She'd already lost her husband. Now she'd lost her daughter. She spent the rest of her life in sorrow, always wondering if there was something she could have done to stop Noor from going. Her brother, Vilayat, channeled his grief into action. He became a Sufi teacher like his father. He traveled the world, spreading messages of peace and love. And he always talked about his sister, about her courage, about her sacrifice, about how she lived her values even in the face of death. He said she was the embodiment of everything their father had taught: service, compassion, truth, and he made it his mission to make sure the world remembered her. Noor's younger siblings, Hidayat and Khairun Nisa, also honored her memory in their own ways. They spoke at memorials, they gave interviews, they kept her story alive, because they understood something important. Noor didn't die for nothing. She died for freedom, for justice, for the belief that every human being deserves to live without fear. And that's worth remembering, that's worth honoring, that's worth passing on to the next generation. In recent years, Noor's story has been told in books, documentaries, even a graphic novel. Schools in Britain teach about her. She's part of the national curriculum. Kids learn about this Indian princess who became a British spy, who refused to carry a gun but carried the weight of the entire resistance on her shoulders, who faced the Gestapo and didn't blink, who died saying liberté. And those kids are inspired. They see that heroism comes in all forms, that you don't have to be a soldier to be brave, that you can fight for what's right in your own way, according to your own values. That's Noor's legacy, not just what she did, but what she represents. Hope, courage, integrity. The belief that one person can make a difference, that's a powerful message, and it's one we need today more than ever. You know, there's a quote from Noor's training file that always gets me. One of her instructors wrote, "She is not overburdened with brains, but has worked hard and shown keenness, apart from some dislike of the security side of the course. Makes you want to laugh, doesn't it? Not overburdened with brains." This woman, who outwitted the Gestapo for 4 months, who maintained the only radio link between London and the French resistance, who stayed silent under torture that broke trained soldiers. Not smart enough. It just shows you how wrong people can be, how easy it is to underestimate someone, especially a woman. Especially a woman who's kind and gentle and doesn't fit the typical warrior mold. But Noor proved them all wrong. She didn't just succeed. She excelled. She became one of the most effective radio operators the SOE ever had. And she did it while staying true to herself. while refusing to compromise her values, while remaining, as her mother said, always stay human. That's not weakness, that's strength, the truest kind. Let me tell you one last story about Noor. Before she left for France, she had dinner with her family. Her mother cooked her favorite meal. Her siblings gathered around. They talked, they laughed, they tried to pretend everything was normal. But everyone knew this might be the last time they'd see each other. As Noor was leaving, her mother took her aside. She held her face in her hands and said, "Remember who you are. Remember what your father taught you. Stay true, stay kind, stay human." Noor promised she would, and she kept that promise, right to the very end. When she was chained in that cell at Pforzheim, when she was being interrogated at Avenue Foch, when she was kneeling in the dirt at Dachau with a gun to her head, she stayed true, she stayed kind, she stayed human. And that's her victory. Not that she survived, she didn't, but that she remained herself, that the Nazis couldn't take away who she was. They could take her freedom, they could take her life, but they couldn't take her soul. And in the end, that's all that really matters. If there's one thing I want you to take away from Noor's story, it's this. You don't have to be perfect to be a hero. You don't have to be fearless. You don't have to be the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. You just have to be willing. Willing to stand up when others sit down. Willing to speak out when others stay silent. Willing to do the right thing even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when it costs you everything. Noor was willing, and that made all the difference. She wasn't a superhero. She was a real person, with fears and doubts and flaws, but she chose courage over comfort, service over safety, integrity over survival. And because of that choice, hundreds of people lived who would have died. Dozens of resistance operations succeeded that would have failed, and the cause of freedom advanced in ways that can't be measured. One woman, one radio, one unbreakable spirit. That's all it took. So here's my challenge to you. What are you willing to stand for? What values are you willing to defend, even when it's hard? What legacy do you want to leave behind? Because, fellas, time is running out. We're not getting any younger. And the world needs people who still believe in things like honor and duty and sacrifice. People who won't just go along with the crowd. People who'll stand up for what's right, even when it's unpopular, even when it's costly, even when it's dangerous. Noor shows us it's possible. She shows us it's worth it. And she shows us that one person, standing alone, can change the course of history. So what are you waiting for? What's your mission? What's your radio? What's the message you need to send, no matter the cost? Think about it. And if this story has inspired you, if it's lit a fire in you, if it's reminded you of what really matters, then please hit that subscribe button. Because I'm going to keep bringing you these stories. Stories of real heroes, real sacrifice, real courage. And I need to know there are people out there who still care, who still want to remember, who still believe that honor and integrity and service matter. So subscribe, leave a comment, share this video. And let's make sure Noor Inayat Khan's story and stories like hers are never forgotten. Noor died saying liberté, freedom. That was her last word, her last thought, her last breath. And you know what? She was free. Even in chains, even facing execution, she was freer than her captors would ever be. Because freedom isn't about where you are. It's about who you are. It's about living according to your values, about making your own choices, about refusing to let anyone, even the Nazis, tell you who to be. Noor was free because she chose to be. And that's a freedom nobody can take away. Not the Gestapo, not torture, not even death. Her body died at Dachau, but her spirit is still free. still inspiring people 70 years later, still reminding us what courage looks like, what integrity looks like, what it means to be truly human. That's immortality, not living forever, but creating something that lasts, a legacy, an example, a light that keeps shining long after you're gone. Noor did that, and you can too, not by being perfect, not by being fearless, just by being willing to stand up, willing to serve, willing to stay true to who you are, no matter what. So let me wrap this up. Noor Inayat Khan was born a princess and died a hero. She was a musician, a writer, a mystic, a spy. She refused to carry a gun but carried the hopes of thousands on her shoulders. She was hunted, captured, tortured, and executed, but she never broke, never betrayed, never gave up. She stayed true to her father's teachings. Be kind, be truthful, serve others. And she proved that those values aren't weaknesses. They're strengths, the truest kind. She saved lives without taking them. She fought evil without becoming evil. She remained human while surrounded by monsters. And when the end came, she faced it with grace, dignity, and one final word: liberté, freedom. That's who Noor Inayat Khan was. That's what she stood for. And that's why 80 years later, we're still talking about her. Because heroes like that don't come around very often. And when they do, we owe it to them to remember, to honor, to learn from their example. So thank you, Noor. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for showing us what courage really looks like. You're not forgotten, and you never will be. And to everyone watching, thank you for sticking with me through this story. I know it's been a long one. But some stories can't be told quickly. Some stories demand your time, your attention, your respect. Noor's story is one of them. If you made it this far, if you're still with me, you're the kind of person who gets it, who understands that these stories matter, that remembering our heroes matters, that learning from the past matters. So do me one last favor. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, hit that like button, leave a comment telling me what you thought, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like Noor's, they have power. Power to inspire, power to change hearts and minds, power to remind us what we're capable of when we decide to be more than just comfortable, more than just safe, more than just ordinary. When we decide to be extraordinary, like Noor. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.